Welcome to Rhythms of Faith. We're so happy to be joined by Dr. Vanessa Chan, an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Notre Dame. Welcome, Vanessa. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
All right. We want to know if you'll tell us a little bit about your journey, both your journey as a person of faith and what brought you to psychology and here to Notre Dame.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, that's a pretty big question. So when I went to college, I went to McGill University in Montreal, and that was the first time that I went to church on my own. And I think some stubborn part of me didn't want to be part of the statistic that fell away at college, even though I didn't have that much knowledge of Catholic tradition at the time. But my mom had recommended the Newman Center, the Catholic chaplaincy on campus. And so I went. Again, it was mostly my stubbornness, but it was there that I kind of learned a lot about the richness of the Catholic tradition. And at the same time, I was studying neuroscience. I was trying to learn about the relationship between like how and why we think and act the way we do, and some of the biology that we understood about the nervous system. And so somewhere along the lines, I realized that studying cells and molecules was a lot of fun, but it wasn't going to answer the kinds of questions that I wanted to answer, which I realized had more to do with sound. And I like music, I like languages, I like learning both things. And so I was more and more interested in that. And I worked with rats during undergrad, and they are fantastic and smart and very cute, but there were a limited number of things that I could ask them when it came to sound processing. So I realized I wanted to switch over to human neuroscience, human psychology. And so I did my graduate degree in psychology at the University of Toronto. And that was studying like how we process speech. And then I did a little bit of how we understand music as well.
Nice. Word on the street is that you're an excellent musician. I've in fact seen this with my own eyes. What drew you to singing and to choral singing in particular?
So I actually started by learning to play piano. Like many kids in my neighborhood, we were put into piano lessons. But I actually started because my best friend played piano. Her parents asked her to play piano. And I saw the piano and I was like, this looks like so much fun. I want to play. So I was one of the few who actually said, I want to, but then I was terrible at practicing. But I had a good ear. And then, you know, like you have recorder, I learned how to play trombone, I played in band. And somewhere in 7th grade, at the same time that we were starting band rehearsals, I also joined choir for the first time. And those things continued. I think I like proliferated the number of musical ensembles throughout high school. At one point, I was part of like 6 at the same time. And then in college, I realized that was a little unsustainable. And also that it sucks playing a trombone when you don't have a gig bag and you now are expected to carry it instead of having your parents drive it around. So I mostly sang throughout undergrad, and then that continued into grad school. And that was a mix of large ensemble, women's ensemble, as well as at the Newman Center in the church choir.
So you're part scientist, part musician, part choral singer. Are these, when you're singing and when you're doing research, are these the same parts of your brain or different?
Yeah, parts of the brain. That's such a
technical question there.
That's such a loaded term. I think we like to talk about how the brain is like has like, you know, specified like actions for like each part of it, but really everything we do is a coordinated activity of multiple brain regions, and music is no exception. In fact, I think one of the reasons why people are so excited about music and how the brain processes it is that it engages so many aspects. It's not just about like the part that processes sound. There is an auditory cortex, but it goes way beyond that, recognizing which instruments played the sound, any visual information that you have to now like synchronize at the same time. Like imagine like you're in an orchestra or some sort of choral ensemble and you're reading the music, and out of the corner of your eye, you've also got like the conductor waving your hands. So you need to be able to do both of those things at the same time. It requires concentrated attention to do that. You have an emotional or affective experience whenever you're listening to or making music, and you're also understanding all the rules of the music at the same time. So being able to keep track of all of those things. And a lot of those things are happening even if you're not consciously aware of them. So it's kind of hard to say that like one part of the brain or like different parts of the brain are active in each of those tasks, because probably they're all active, but they're all just connected in different ways.
So I want to follow up on that. So I'm really interested in kind of the relationship between what happens when we make music and what happens when we listen to music.
Yeah. I think a lot of the things are similar. One of the surprising aspects, I think, for a lot of people is that we like moving to music even when we're not making it, right? So the whole idea of groove, we describe groove as something that you want to move to, and it kind of feels nice to. You don't feel forced into moving along with the music. And that seems to be tracked with actually like motor planning areas in our brain. So areas that are involved in like sequencing as well as initiating movement are active when we're listening to music, and they're active even when we're not actually moving. So even when we're just listening to music, if it's got like a good beat, our brain is able to track that, and being able to track that actually is useful for people who struggle with movement disorders. They can use something with a strong beat actually to like then ground their movements towards, because they have trouble sometimes initiating them on their own. So having a beat actually helps them being able to do that. So a classic example is that of Parkinson's disease. One of the hallmarks is difficulty with movement. You can describe somebody with sort of an unsteady gait or like walking pattern. And once you provide them with either like a metronome beat or even just with music that they enjoy, that they can detect the beat to, they can walk a lot more smoothly than if they don't have it.
So neurologically, what do we know about why humans started making music in the first place, or kind of how it developed?
In terms of the neuroscience, I would say one thing that we do know, or that does seem to be apparent, is that there is some shared mechanism that links language and music. I don't think all of those are linked, and so there's a little bit of debate as to how linked those mechanisms are. But the idea is that there seems to be some overlap in the neural architecture that these two systems rely on, and there's a lot of similarities between them, right? They're both systems of complex, organized sounds that are made into patterns that generate meaning, and being able to discriminate between different patterns of sound based on frequencies is really important in both language and in music. So those things, I think, because they build on the same architecture, one of the arguments is that if you become good at one, that might transfer into being good at the other. Now, this doesn't always play out, but we do see some of that coming up in the way that people develop, or if people are predisposed to be good at one, they might be predisposed to be a little better at the other. As to why, I feel like this is like a better question for some people who study like evolution, but there's some estimates that or hypotheses about this proto-language that existed before music and language became separate phenomena, that where whatever sounds people were making back then had both a little bit of a musical quality and a little bit of like what we now call sort of like a linguistic quality to it. And at some point they diverged, but they grew to acquire different like sets of meaning, and so both of them remained culturally relevant as people evolved. One argument for music is the fact that it facilitates social bonding in a way that language doesn't. unlike language where, you know, you're both sitting here quietly listening to me and not saying anything, in music, you can actually all participate in the action at the same time instead of waiting for someone to finish. And so the coordinated action of music and also its repetitiveness, its ease of following, its inclination to synchronize movement, all those things, people have tried to test different elements to see whether or not it facilitates like increased like sociality between groups of people. And the idea is that this can happen between mother and child, between two potential mates, between groups of friends, all the way to like entire like coordinated groups of people. Like if you think about
Taylor Swift concert.
Taylor Swift concert, or you know, a congregation, or even like in the military, the marching band, and how everyone marches in step. One of the things I was surprised at, like meeting some friends who then were like majoring in music and then went on to get jobs in music, was that a lot of them were hired by the military because they invest so much in like this camaraderie that they facilitate partially through the music that they make.
Sure. Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot in Rhythms of Faith. We talk about kind of the way that singing together kind of creates church. And I want to know, like, kind of what are some peak experiences for you, either related to liturgical worship or related to liturgical music? Like, do you have a favorite piece?
Ooh, let's see. I'm trying to think of a couple. I love Easter Vigil for a lot of reasons. But one of the first experiences I had at college was doing the full vigil, all 7 readings, all 7 psalms, and I was in the choir and I was singing psalms, and they didn't have a deacon who could sing the Exultet, so one year they asked me, hey, can you do it? And all of that stuff. I think just the sense of going through the entire Triduum with this group of people, we're there at every liturgy, we're singing every night. By the end of it, everyone's very tired, but also like super happy. We're welcoming people into the church. And frankly, at the end, I think we were also kind of exhausted and saying, oh, thank God it's over. My voice is shot. But I think there was very much a sense of like, there was a very strong sense of togetherness in that moment. But I think the other experiences that I would strongly associate with liturgical music would be when sometimes you'd pull out like an old favorite that everyone in the choir already knows, even if like the people just joined, like maybe that's like Palestrina's Sicut Cervus or Talus's If You Love Me, and we would just start singing it.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we wouldn't even be in church, we wouldn't even be in rehearsal, and we'd just start singing it. And everyone who was new, they'd pick up on it pretty quickly, or they had already sung it, so everyone already knew it, and we just all started singing it. So I think there's that sense of companionship that you get when it's all like you have like when everyone has like their secret code that they seem to know. For some reason, Palestrina and Talus seem to be that among church singers. So those two particularly are like, I guess like close to my heart in that sense, as like, I guess like experiences that bring me a lot of joy.
Yeah. The nice thing about the secret code too is it's like written on a page, so you can learn it.
Yeah.
even if you don't know it when you're new.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you want me to airdrop that to you?
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone just like starts reading on the phone.
What do you think is one thing that people of faith stand to gain from engagement with psychology or neuroscience?
I like to think of psychology and neuroscience as engaging with questions of the human condition in like a particular lens. That describes, I think, very much my own journey to it. I didn't start out thinking that I wanted to study the human condition. I took intro to psychology when I intended to be a biology major. Realized that, hey, actually this stuff is really cool. And then neuroscience seemed like some kind of fit between the two. I think that these disciplines have maybe a bit of a bad rap of seeming like they're trying to strip away the mystery of humanity. And I guess I would just invite people to think about it a little differently, because frankly, I feel like the more and more we've kind of like peeled away layers, it's like the onion that never ends.
Yeah.
Like it just keeps going. And I feel like that's true for all scientific disciplines, but particularly so in the case of like psychology and neuroscience. I think it tells us a lot about ourselves, and sometimes there's a bit of discomfort in sort of like peeling those layers and seeing yourself in some of those things or not seeing yourself in some of those things, and then realizing like what happened here, right? But these are simply observations that we make about people and then infer something about how people as a whole act. And I think that there's a lot of attraction because I feel like I'm getting to know what humanity is. Not that it replaces getting to know each individual person, but it also tells me a little bit about myself.
Yeah.
And like how I should, interact with other people. What are some of the barriers that people have to interacting with me? And how can I learn about others to welcome them into a more loving and just world? So I guess I just invite people to consider psychology and neuroscience in that lens, and to be open to it, because I think all of these things are just pointing to the same truth of God's creation in a particular way.
Yeah.
And as a scientist who also professes a Catholic faith, I think that these things are just pointing to the same reality.
Yeah.
That we are understanding how God made us, and it doesn't tell us how we should act or behave, and I don't think that's the purview of the discipline, but it tells us how we do act and behave, and that's also really important too.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. You came to talk to Rhythms of Faith, and you talked a little bit about some of the research you're doing right now on emotions and musical keys, for example. Would you give us a little bit of an overview? I know we had talked about sort of major and minor keys and our stereotypes of those keys as like happy and sad. Would you talk a little bit more in depth about how that plays out in practice?
Yeah, so in Western music, we have the concept of major and minor, and colloquially, like we describe, major's the more happy sounding one, and minor's the more sad sounding one. And I would say that is generally reinforced throughout like classical music in particular, but also when we think about like film music and how it's written to sort of set certain moods. I find that more and more pop music doesn't kind of fit that mold as much. And one of the other things that maybe we didn't talk about in class per se is that tempo actually plays a really important role. So how fast the music is going, because it turns out once the music goes faster and faster, it doesn't matter whether you're playing major chords or minor chords. It just feels more intense.
Yeah.
And generally also happier. So so that's a really interesting sort of like mixture of those observations. But one of the things that I've been working on recently in collaboration with Bertolt Höckner and music is this idea of mixed emotions in music. We think about happy and sad, but we experience a whole range of emotions, some of which we would describe as a little bit of positive and a little bit of negative too. Even if they're mostly positive experiences, there's still a little bit of sort of like this negative feeling. So one I might describe is nostalgia. So you are very happy of this experience of the past. You think about this time, but also a lot of people describe that as being a slightly sad moment because you don't have it anymore. It's something that happened and you're grateful it happened, but it's not happening anymore. And so that's one way we might describe a mixed emotion. And what we were interested in is whether or not either going back and forth between major and minor chords, or playing chords that seem to stack both major and minor at the same time, could induce or represent rather mixed emotions more than just major chords and minor chords. So that's something that we've been looking into. We seem to see some inclinations that these are elements that lead to the identification of a sort of mixed emotion in music. And now what we're trying to do is, well, two things. One is, what influences people to hear those mixed emotions in music? Is it people who are more musically trained are more likely to hear it that way? Or does everyone? And then if it's true that there are these, songs or pieces of music that carry a particular mixed emotion, what can we use that for, right? If you think about mixed emotions, do they elicit thought more about the past? Do they invite us to think about situations that maybe are a little unresolved? Maybe like you long for something else in those, and helping you to think about those a little differently. So I think those are opportunities for us to, explore music and see how people respond to it differently.
Yeah, it makes me think of some of the expressions of Black American music, like blues and jazz, and where, the line between major and minor is blurred on purpose. So with that in mind, as well as like non-Western musics, is this kind of like a fixed perception of all humans? When you hear major things, they elicit one feeling. When you hear minor things, they elicit another? Or is this culturally kind of conceived?
Yeah, I would say that what people associate with major and minor doesn't seem to be consistent. There's some research that suggests that in some cultures, actually, the relationship is reversed. So if they hear minor, they actually think that that's happier than if they hear major. And there's also a difference in terms of like what people prefer. So when I came to class, we talked about the idea of consonance versus dissonance, and how consonance is like what sounds nice and dissonance is like what doesn't sound nice. But people don't start off with the idea necessarily that consonance sounds nice and dissonance doesn't sound nice. A lot of research involving babies and sort of measuring like babies' like behaviors suggests that they can tell the difference between the two, but there isn't necessarily a preference for consonants that's present right away. I'd say the research kind of goes back and forth on that. Some early research thought it did, and then some more recent research suggests it doesn't. And even then, when you look at cultures around the world, major and minor doesn't exist in every like musical culture, and there are some musical cultures that explicitly enjoy what we might explain as clashing of dissonance, but some cultures actually kind of like lean into that and do that more, and they see that as like the pleasing element of music. So no, I don't think it's universal that we prefer it, but I do think that there are like structures in our ear and our brain that recognize that these two things aren't the same.
Yeah.
You had said that we're seeing a departure in pop music from the major minor thing that we would have seen, kind of earlier in music. And I'm interested in the kind of ubiquity of pop music. Do you think people are unlearning some of these cultured preferences?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Or is pop music just like subverting itself?
Like what? Yeah, I don't know. I think in some ways the general tone is still preserved, but I also just think that pop music isn't necessarily just happy music anymore either. Like I think there's a change in what is popular, right? Like pop music is just whatever is popular and whatever other musical traditions people draw inspiration from. So I think that there's a change in what pop music is, but I don't necessarily know that it's changing our impressions of like what major and minor are. The other thing I didn't mention earlier is that it turns out that there's like some people who are really good at telling these distinctions between major and minor, and there's some people who just aren't. And not all of that can be explained by musical training either. So there might just be some people who are less sensitive to the differences to begin with.
When it comes to like, I think this is tied into what we were just talking about, but music very much functions in the way of like creating expectation and then either kind of fulfilling that expectation or taking us in a different direction. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the brain when expectation is fulfilled or foiled?
Yeah. So the first thing to establish is that we are generating expectations all the time, whether we're consciously aware of them or not. The brain is sort of programmed to generate predictions about the world. So this is true for what word you think is going to come out of my mouth next in a sentence. This is true for what scene you would expect next in a movie. This is also true for what chord or what note you expect next in a piece of music. So there's a lot of joy that we can get from like listening to a piece of music and being able to follow along to like a satisfying ending. There's also, some people argue, a sense of fulfillment that we get when something that we listen to doesn't go the way that we expect it to at first, but eventually it ends up in a place that we can follow along. And so that brief moment where our expectations are so-called violated eventually actually does lead to like a moment of enjoyment. Some people associate that with like peak musical experiences. Recently I was talking to some students. I asked them, like, have you ever gotten chills? Where do you think you get musical chills? Like when you listen to a piece of music. And some of them said like at bridges of like songs. Because, and I thought that was really interesting because it fits this idea very well. Suddenly there's a change in the lyrical content and the musical structure as a whole, but it takes you back to something that's familiar. There also seems to be sort of, changes in instrumentation, in emotion, in volume as the bridge goes on. And all of those things, people describe some of those experiences as kind of awe-inducing. And that's also something that's associated with like the sensation of chills. So I think that the arguments some researchers have made is that these experiences of chills or these peak experiences are associated with our reward systems. That our reward systems exist to tell us what we like and also motivate future behaviors to learn like what should we do to get that again. So I think that these peak musical experiences are telling us this was something really cool and we should do something to kind of look for this again. And for some people, they might have a higher tolerance for like the unexpectedness of what comes next in music, and some people have a lower tolerance for that. Some of that comes with some natural listening tendencies. Some of that comes from how familiar you are with the material. But that's sort of the general trajectory that like we form expectations, whether we're conscious of them or not. And depending on a mixture of these things, sometimes those violations of our expectations are actually kind of fun because they break the rules just enough for us to be like, and then slip back into the rule structure and say, oh, but that's actually a really interesting way of changing it up on us.
So is it fair to say that the reward system, like we can learn to withstand more uncertainty or discomfort in the music because we know, or we've had an experience where that led to a greater level of fulfillment in the experience?
I think that is possible.
Okay.
To say that more familiarity with something, whether that's a musical genre or specific piece, could lead to subsequent appreciation. Does it involve the reward system in exactly the same way? Probably not.
Okay.
But generally, we observe that people who are more experienced with something have a little bit better of an appreciation of when things don't go the way we might expect.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to apply that to your kind of peak liturgical experience of singing like a really familiar piece of music with a group that might include some new members? Do you think any of that is active in that experience? Or do you think that's a different type of peak experience than the subversion of expectations?
Yeah. Let's see. It's interesting that you asked that, because that's an example where everyone is very familiar with that particular piece. I think that there's a little bit of both, in that you're not always singing with the same group of people, but the music is exactly the same. So sometimes people might interpret a particular line in a different way than a previous group has. But I think actually what's happening there, what that makes it a rewarding experience, at least for me, is actually the social element of it. The fact that we're doing this together. We have a synchronized, coordinated activity. It facilitates a bonding moment between all the members who are singing at the same time. So I think that maybe better characterizes why I like those experiences so much.
And I think you described it as a spontaneous experience, right? Everybody's together and they just whip out a piece of music and sing it, right? So there is that element of, I didn't know I would be singing this favorite today, and now here we are.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So maybe like over sort of like a event superstructure. So like if you look at like everything in the day, this is not one of the things that I expected to occur, but it's a rewarding experience in and of itself.
I got a twofer to close us out. One is silly and one is serious. So first, if you could share a book recommendation with anyone who's listening, what would it be? And second, we asked our students on the first day of class, if you were an animal, which would you be?
Okay. I can answer the animal one first, actually.
Okay, great.
I would say an owl.
Oh my gosh.
So
that was Kim's too.
There's a couple of reasons for this. In undergrad, all of this goes back to my undergrad chaplaincy experience.
We're finishing where we started.
We had festivals for like every different animal. There was one for like the fox and one for like other woodland creatures. There was one specifically for owls. And that became like, I don't know, a core memory for me. But also owls, like Athena's like goddess Athena of wisdom. Hers was an owl. Owls are just thought to be sort of like wise. They have very good sound localization.
Yeah,
and
course.
I don't know if you've ever seen those those pictures that show you what like owl legs actually look like. Talk about violation of expectations, right? So I just think owls are really cool. I also am kind of obsessed with Duolingo, and Duo is an owl. So,
that's right. That's right.
In terms of a book, oh gosh, this one's kind of hard. I did recently read God at the Ritz by Lorenzo Albacete. He was a priest who was also formerly like a physicist, and then like went to the seminary, became a priest, and he wrote this book in response to being invited to, I think, talk on some like live talk show. And he was like at the Ritz-Carlton with all these people, and they were like asking him like all these questions about like God and why God is relevant. And he's like, well, I didn't really have a good answer at the time. And then I sat down and wrote this book. Was kind of the gist. I think he doesn't give himself enough credit, but that's very much his typical style. He writes in a slightly irreverent, but also very relatable way about just the meaning of the world and how it relates to God. And so I really enjoyed it. And that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Well, Vanessa, this has just been absolutely fascinating. We're so grateful for joining us today. We'll be right back. Thank you so much.